Well, hello and welcome to The Sacred Speaks. My name is John Price. I'm your host, and today I bring you one of my most beloved teachers, Father Richard Rohr. I am deeply honored to spend this time with him and also to deliver this incredible wisdom that he spouts to you. So it's been a big year for The Sacred Speaks, a lot of building in the background, which is one of the reasons for the past year I've been a little more quiet than I typically have. There's about 11 episodes that came out last year, and I'm looking to bump that up times two. So I've got a year set out for 2 episodes, 2 interviews per month, plus one solo episode per month. And I will be releasing my first solo episode following this episode, and it will be a synthesis of the father role, mentorship, the masculine, looking at the father archetype primarily, and just kind of gathering up all the content that I've learned, certainly from these two, both James Hollis that came out last episode, and then Father Richard Rohr. So there's a new rhythm. That's something you can expect. Also, be looking for the website Dr. John W. Price. Pardon all the signifiers. There's a lot of John Prices out there in the world, so I had to find some way to differentiate myself a little bit. Pay attention, because there will be a free workshop I'll be offering on the really beginning stages of what I'm writing about in my book. And I'm excited to release that to you. But for those of you that do sign up, get on the newsletter, get involved, it will be a free offering to you after a number of weeks. I'll close that off, and it'll be a for-fee purchase. So try to get in while the getting's good. Richard has been an incredible human being to so many. He's almost 82 years old, and having gone through a wild life and lots of transformation, he brings us his latest book, The Tears of Things. And I followed this process for him. It's very exciting to finally have the conversation with him on the prophets, those ancient voices who refused illusion and who spoke, they critiqued the social sin, not the individual sin. It was a really fantastic conversation. I'm grateful, Richard. Of course, look at the liner notes below. Check him out at Center for Action and Contemplation, CAC.org, and get his books where you get his books, everywhere. So for now, check out The Sacred Speaks, check out Father Richard Rohr and the Center for Action and Contemplation, and with gratitude, I bring you Richard Rohr. For now, we'll leave it there.
New love unfolds, controls your dreams.
Father Richard Rohr has spent a lifetime guiding people toward transformation through his books, teachings, and the deeply contemplative space he's created for so many to wrestle with: faith, doubt, and the vast mystery of existence. He's challenged dogma, embraced paradox, and reminded us that true faith is not certainty, but a willingness to stand in the tension of the unknown. Now, almost 82, after numerous battles with his body and life and reality and a lifetime of spiritual inquiry, Richard offers us a powerful and timely book, The Tears of Things. In his book, he turns to the prophets, the ancient voices who saw beyond illusion, who refused the easy comforts of certainty, and who dared to name the collective sins of their time. But today, we aren't only going to talk about his work. I want to talk about him, his journey, his struggles, his evolution, what he sees now, looking back on a lifetime of teaching, and what still remains unresolved in his body, mind, heart, and spirit. Richard, thank you for being here. I have a deep love for you, so I appreciate you making the time.
What an invitation. Well, I have love for you, as you know. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks for joining this space. And as I said, I've got a list of 20 questions, but I'm sure we're going to get to like 4. So
Hey, whatever.
you
Please,
set the pace. Let me know
please.
if we start to labor on too long and you need to get off. You've written and spoken about transformation your whole life, which your career and your process, it's even odd to call it a career. I mean, your vocation and your leadership. But for you personally, when was the moment you realized that life changed and wouldn't be the same?
My life.
Your life.
You know, it was slowly a dawning recognition
Mm.
as people began to respond to the things I said, and I literally couldn't believe it. Hasn't everybody said this already? it, it didn't seem so original to me.
Yeah.
And yet I grew used to it. I hope not expecting it or needing it, but used to it, and that's dangerous too. But I was somewhere in the middle of life's journey, as
Mhm.
Dante would say.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating shift, though. I mean, because did this put you in Cincinnati at that time?
Yes, that would have begun in Cincinnati. My first 15 years after ordination. I've been out here in New Mexico almost 38 now.
Yeah. Yeah, your gifts, you and I've always kind of talked on about this, that I there is an incredible way you have of distilling complex information in very digestible ways, and that's such a gift to be a translator. And I think one of the things that I really enjoy about talking with you is you go from the simple to the complex very effortlessly. And so it's a fun exchange with you, and to hear you make sense of, topics that are really enormous. I mean, we're talking about mysteries essentially, and you have a real cohesive way of understanding these our relationship to mystery. So that's no easy task.
Well, I hope so. If it's true, it came as a gift, not
Mhm.
by intelligence or effort, just realization.
Did you have leadership positions when you were a young man, like in your teens and 20s?
Well, I was in the seminary. There was no room to stand out there.
How did a bright shining star like you manage that? It's
Uh, in a Franciscan seminary, humility was about as high a virtue as you could get. So if you did have any gift, you didn't show it off.
wow.
Yeah.
Well, and it reminds me of something that you said at one point that has been a pretty significant practice for me. It's a terrifying practice, which is to ask to be humbled
Oh,
each day.
once a
Oh,
day.
that one.
Once a day.
Yes.
I need it.
Yeah.
I've gotten way too much, really, way too much adulation and admiration in my life, which I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
I just can't take it too seriously.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's no easy task. You gave a quote recently in this book about people, certainly in our stage of life right now, it seems, deeply connected with fame and materialism and success and status. And not only to be somebody that prays for humility or to be humbled once a day, but also this Franciscan order that you're a part of that sets you up to be almost at odds with so many of our cultural values today.
More than I ever imagined.
Yeah.
It became clear to me this was not the American agenda. I'm not trying to be anti American, but we love celebrity and wealth and fame.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Not the Franciscan way, huh?
No, not at all. Not at all.
What is the Franciscan way? What was so attractive about that?
Francis named us Friars Minor. That's the initials after our name, Order of Friars Minor. And he put it right in in the name that we were to be the minoritas class.
Mm,
He saw what the mayores, the majors, did in 13th century Italy to perpetuate constant war.
mm,
And he did everything he could to keep us outside of that system by our very location in the city, by our associations, by our self image. He took it on almost fanatically. And yet I see now how it's necessary that someone do that, having studied the prophets. That's what they did. You might say they overstated their case, so at least a few would get the case. Yeah.
well, you make another one of these fantastic reminders that you've gifted to me and others is this idea that Christianity wasn't about the demonic, but about the ego. And it seems like that's part of your passion, is to remember that we have these parts of ourselves that will seek out inevitably greed, all these various kind of extensions or exaggerations of these qualities that we have. And so the need is that we have to relativize that in some way. And that's part of the religious life, spiritual life.
Yes, you understand. Among the many good things psychology did for religion, it gave us many new words
Hmm.
and a language, and ego is one of them.
Hmm.
The contemporary world has, probably for partially good reason, tired of the word sin.
Hmm.
It just felt like some way to condemn other people. And we even interpreted the prophets that way, although that was not true. The prophets always critiqued Israel first and
Hmm.
foremost, their own group, which set a pattern for self criticism. In a pattern that Judaism didn't follow very well, Catholicism didn't follow very well, Protestantism didn't follow very well, because there's only one thing more dangerous than the individual ego, and that's the group ego.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
When your group tells you you're right, you're offended, or whatever it might be.
And therefore you need to fight.
Fight,
Yeah.
scapegoat, attack,
Yeah.
whatever the word might be, with
Yes.
impunity. Yeah.
That's the
And,
what yeah, go into that. What comes up for you around that through your teachings and what you've observed in our culture?
I've been influenced so much by the work of the Frenchman, Rene Girard,
Mm.
who really unpackaged the scapegoat mechanism.
Mm.
And he claims, I think, without overstatement, he goes to great lengths to prove it in many books, that the scapegoat mechanism is almost entirely unconscious,
Mhm.
which I'm sure Carl Jung would agree with, but it's highly operative. And that which we do not know in ourselves and that which we do not like in ourselves, we will, with 100% certitude, project elsewhere
Mhm.
onto another group. The Holocaust, you think, would have taught us that forever, but it clearly hasn't.
Clearly.
What you don't know, what you don't love, you hate.
Mhm.
Darn. It's the worst of dualistic thinking. Yeah.
So that's two things that I want to tee up there. The first is dualistic thinking, what you mean by that. And then you've referenced now a couple of times the prophets, and so we may as well accept the invitation and really dig into this book because it was a long time waiting for me. I mean, I was kind of anticipating this for a number of months. So it's good to finally read it. So talk about dualistic thinking, what that means to you, and then we'll dive into the prophets.
The normal way the unconverted mind thinks, and by
Mm.
the unconverted mind, I mean the mind that is still tied to the ego again, its own self, as if its judgments are the center of the world, are always right, is either or thinking,
Mhm.
all or nothing thinking. You're either with me or you're against me and to be stopped. I don't even think this needs much proof. Once you say it to most people, if they have any honesty, they get it. Most people, unless they've done some inner work, highly tied to their ego. And by the ego, I mean the separate self, which religion would say is an illusion,
Mhm.
the superior self, which I guess religion would again say is an illusion. It's a non-goal
Mhm.
to need to think of yourself as superior. But as long as your mind is tied to that self, which Thomas Merton, others we would call the false self, the separate, superior, constructed self, you will almost always think dualistically.
Mhm.
It's shocking how true that is. And you could almost call it at the core of enlightenment to see that my seeing makes me think it's all about me. I give these men's rites of passage up here at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. And one of the lines I used to use that seemed to have the most impact just brought forth a shocked look on men's faces. What I said when I said, you know what, your life is not about you.
What are you talking
That
about?
just that just undercuts
Yeah.
Western individualism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, of course it's about me. What else would it be about? And then I'd switch it around to make it a little more palatable and say, you're about life. You are one little instance of something that's been happening, now we know, for hundreds of thousands of years. And you're just another instance, a beloved instance, religion should say. Your life is not about you. That should take 1,000 pounds off your back. And
Mhm.
with a lot of men, it did. A lot of men. Got it. Got it. I don't need to be a superstar. I don't need to be rich or famous. I already am. I'm using religious language. Forgive me if you don't like it. In the mind and heart of God, I'm already special, beloved, famous. When that realization hits you, the spiritual journey begins.
Mhm. Yeah, I see with a lot of men this idea of ordering, has been coming up a lot. And I love this film, Whiplash. Have you seen that one with,
No,
oh,
no.
it's fantastic. If you
Oh,
wanna watch the image of the masculine energies that just seek to order the world, it's the
oh,
best image of the father complex I've seen.
oh,
Yeah,
I'll look
it's
for it.
exceptional. It's
Is it on
exceptional.
Netflix?
I don't know where it is, but it's
I'll
exceptional. I'll
find
send you the link, and it's just an amazing film. But the point is that there's a kind of inherent nature to the masculine to order the
it.
world,
Yeah,
and so
yes.
when I hear you talk about that, it's not about you. The one of the things I hear in that is it's not necessarily ordered in the way that you perceive it to be. And
Good.
for men, there's like, wait a second, like it's just as it is, but there's not a consciousness that the world has kind of responded to your ordering, for better or for worse, and then to realize that that's not the singular worldview to see your life from is destabilizing for a lot of people because it's like, what you mean? What do you mean? So
Uh,
you took men through that process to disrupt that assumption that life was about me.
well, I tried with more success than I ever expected. Almost as if, initiation of the male was found in every historic major culture. The Christian West gave that word initiation to baptism.
Mm,
And we Catholics, darn it, started doing it to children.
mhm.
We babified the whole thing. You can't initiate a baby. You can bless a baby. If we call it baby blessing, that would have been real. But baptism,
Yeah.
we lost our own initiation rite. And so we have Western Christianity filled with and even often led by uninitiated, usually men. It's not going to get us anywhere. It just can't. It doesn't have the inner energy, the inner
Mhm.
vitality, the inner joy, really, to get you there.
what this is at risk of being reductive, but
You're never reductive. Go ahead.
I'm afraid I can be very well. I just want to get underneath what you learned about because you studied. I mean, you dove deep into this men's rites of passage, but even backing further up, you're not just talking about rites of passage for men. You're talking about initiation process and
Yes.
insight that you're talking about there is with baptism. I never understood. I mean, whether it's circumcision or baptism, the fact that those things don't happen at a particular time when you're conscious of it, it feels like it's for everybody else and not for the person. And so that to me, it doesn't make sense as a process to go through. And so would you speak to this initiation, ritual, culture, what Western, not just Catholicism, but Christianity really got wrong here?
Initiation, as the word gives away, was to lead you into being a full human being,
Mm,
a human being who belonged on this earth and was already on a journey which he largely did not know about.
mm,
I was lucky enough to have 5 years to study everything I could,
mhm.
even to visit in Australia and Africa.
Oof.
I was allowed by Maasai chiefs in Africa to be led around by two warriors to show me here's where we learned this, here's where we learned that. In fact, there's a direct line from that to the day of grief in this book on the
Mhm.
things.
Well, you referenced it.
Oh, did I? Oh, man.
Yeah, yeah, you and it was the cave.
The caves of grief. Here's where we learn to cry.
Oh,
And these tough looking guys, telling me they learned to cry and they said it with pride. It was just so beautiful.
mm,
We don't have an initiation rite to send men into battle. We
mhm.
don't have a purification rite as they did when men returned from battle. So we have PTSD everywhere. Rituals are far more important than we realized.
Oof. Yeah.
Maybe we Catholics did them too automatically and too sanctimoniously. But as a result, Protestantism became ritually abhorrent because it didn't want to be Catholic, which I
Yeah.
understand. But as a result, all they had left were words, words, and words are not initiation. I told the men the first night of the 5-day event, I'm going to talk to you once each day, and the rest of the day is going to be either in silence or in ritual.
Mm.
And on the last day, they would say, without exception, Richard, you say some nice things, but it was the rituals that got us
Yeah.
and the silence that hammered it in deep.
Mhm.
You Protestants depended too much on words. We Catholics depended too much upon sacred rituals.
Mhm.
I love that we felt were sacred because we priests did them. I don't know that that always carries the weight of sacrality.
Yeah.
I love the name of your webcast, The Sacred Speaks.
Thank you.
It speaks with an authority that doesn't need ordained priesthood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
The holy space with no walls.
there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that a truth? We've separated. I mean, of course, like yes, we're going to get to your book, The Tears of Things, but I
Well, don't
also
worry about it. I'm not here to sell books.
I well, I also think about another one of your books that did sell very well, The Universal Christ, and you really helped. I mean, the inherent dualistic thinking and imagining that God is something elsewhere,
Yes.
and so speak to that a little bit because that sets our culture off in some pretty unfortunate directions.
Well, the most shocking sentence I had in that book for many people was Christ is not Jesus' last name. And they pull back. It isn't Jesus Christ. No, it's a title that was applied to him later. Jesus is the historic incarnation. Christ is the universal
Mm,
manifestation of the mystery of divinity entering into materiality. And that's been true since the Big Bang. The Big Bang is it, in fact,
mhm,
where spirit enters into matter. Jesus simply becomes the image for Christians in a moment of time who walks around with full realization of that, not
mhm.
denying he is the Son of God and a beloved Son of God at that.
Yeah, that was an insight for me at one point. I had actually had a Jewish mentor of mine, an incredible psychologist, who I was wrestling with my own religious worldview, and I was really like pushing up against Christianity. I discovered Buddhism and dove headfirst into contemplative practice
You
there.
have to for a while. You have
Yeah,
to.
and because Christianity to me was really social and from my experience was quite empty, and so Buddhism really allowed for me to rediscover that juiciness, but it also helped me understand how affected Christianity had been by some really incredible misunderstandings. And I can only imagine it was
Incredible.
men trying to possess and control the narrative.
Yeah, you've probably heard me say, John, I don't mean to be arrogant in saying this, but I still believe we're in early Christianity.
Yeah.
We're only beginning to unpackage the depth that is there. Maybe that's true of all world religions.
Hmm.
When you know how long the universe has lasted and human civilization has lasted, God must be very patient. He doesn't rush the process.
Yeah.
He knows he's going to win because he's God.
Well, you've said if I could start to reference your latest book, The Tears of Things, you wrote at one point that I didn't say exclusively, but my interpretation, I'll fill this in a little bit, that the primary sin is idolatry.
Yes, for
And
Judaism, it's the one sin. Yes.
Mhm. And that's a little bit about I think what we're talking about here, if I could take some leaps, which is, in large part, we've taken the historical Jesus and created an idol and
Yeah.
and violated one of the principles of Christianity at the outset.
Yes. He is for us what the Buddha is for Buddhists, the
Mhm.
realized one who realizes and holds the truth, personifies it, exemplifies it. Use whatever word you want. But it doesn't mean those who join the Jesus Club are more beloved of God than everybody else.
Yeah.
That hardly needs proof at this point in history.
Well, it's certainly given you a great deal of well, I guess there back to that Buddhist thread and also the non-dual thread. One of the things that I think you so quickly said you kind of have to. I didn't when I what I found in Buddhism was real dogma and a real pathway and a real practice and a lot of lists and ways to orient myself and it was of course very contemplative in its process. So I was meditating daily for years and of course there wasn't this kind of transpersonal reality necessarily, but it was a practice based in right here, right now. It did end up supporting my kind of journey back into understanding Christianity in a different way. But you've titled your nonprofit Action and Contemplation, Center for Action and Contemplation. And so what I think one of the things that I like about your monastic background is your contemplative nature. And yet you're in a tradition of Christianity or Catholicism that is not as contemplative. What does that bring up for you?
First of all, immense disappointment.
Mm,
We had such a gem and we sold it so short.
mm,
We made it a win lose narrative at which, if we'd be honest, very few won.
Mm.
The vast majority lost, if we're to believe our own rules. And that's true of Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and Protestantism.
Mhm.
We each made it an exclusive club for the enlightened. And then we defined enlightenment as belonging to our club, sort of a circular non logic. But we're falling out of it. And I do use the word falling intentionally, the way I use it in the book, Falling Upward. It just isn't working for so many people. And those who claim it's working for them are far too often such poor models of what we want to be: racist, materialistic, sexist, homophobic, name it. Name it. It's almost is the norm. And I'm not trying to be unkind or superior. I found all those things in me first, but I did find them here. And so I stopped needing, pair our previous words, needing to
Mhm.
project it elsewhere. Richard was racist, sexist, homophobic, and all the rest. What are you smiling at?
I'm just grateful for that. Like just that, I can't tell you how many times I say to people, like, we don't do anything helpful when we just openly criticize other people. And
Anybody,
of course,
anybody.
there are folks, we need boundaries and we need all that stuff. But the act of contemplation is the recognition that, and I'll quote Hollis. Hollis quotes Terence, and he says that, Roman playwright, nothing human is alien to me. And that comes up for me as I listen to you say that, because that's what we do in psychotherapy and all the groups that I'm a part of. We're trying to get to genuine exploration, honest exploration of the multiplicity of your inner life. And we're in a world that says you exist outside of yourself, and it's in things and surfaces and approval. And for you to just come out there and say that, I resonate deeply with that.
Yeah. Why would God give us these human bodies, human emotions, and then jump in immediately and say that most of it's bad? I mean, God couldn't be playing a game like that upon us. But one of my major points in the book is most of us start just like the prophets, angry.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of people close the books of the prophets. But my hope is people will stay on the same trajectory that the prophets are on, and their anger will transmute ever so surely into sadness.
Hmm.
And sadness feeds the soul. Sadness opens up the soul. Sadness unites the soul to other
Hmm.
soul. Anger just, it doesn't do very much except for the ego.
Hmm.
Tells me I'm
Hmm.
superior, I'm right, I'm offended. How much of America is offended now?
Hmm. Hmm.
I think of Paul in Corinthians, love takes no offense. Wow, what does he mean by that? I mean, love takes no offense. I know he's right now, but that self that still wants to take offense is a self that wants to be on top of something.
Hmm.
Yeah. Then it doesn't just move from anger to sadness, but at the end of more than half of the prophets, even
Mm.
praise Yahweh. What? This was the same person I heard cursing God almost 15 chapters ago, and now he's in love with God. This is why I talk about transformation. The prophets, and see, what the prophets do is they don't foretell Jesus, they create the runway, the trajectory. We call it the lineage out of which Jesus himself speaks. Jesus, and I'm going to make a strong statement, Jesus cannot be understood except in the lineage of a Jewish prophet.
Mm,
And you get them, you get where he's coming from and where he's going.
that's a really important
It's
note.
it's one of the most important points in the book. And I think I can make a strong case for it. There's no lineage of messiahs. There's no lineage of sons of God. We're all sons of God, and daughters of God. But there is a lineage of the prophetic mind, and it's the internal critic whose criticism has transmuted into love. So I call it in one of the later chapters sacred criticism.
Mm.
And that has to be an internalized role inside of every religious group. Or you know what? Well, you used the word already. Religion, I'm going to make an overly strong statement, forgive me, but I'm going to say religion always becomes idolatrous.
Wow.
Always,
Yeah.
always becomes idolatrous.
Unpack that a little bit.
It worships itself, not
Mhm.
God. Claiming it's worshiping God, but what it's in love with is its own costumes, its own rituals. And I'm a lover of Buddhism like you are.
Mhm.
If I had to go to Buddhist countries to see, dang it, they do it
Them
too.
too. Yeah, I know. I did the same thing.
Oh,
Yeah.
darn, I had
I,
them on a pedestal.
I romanticized it so much, and
Oh,
it
we
had the
all
fall.
do,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is okay to get us out of our idolatry of
yeah.
Western Christianity.
Well, but it does have in its dogma this idea of kill the Buddha. You meet the
It
Buddha on the
sure
road, kill
does.
the Buddha,
It
and
sure does.
we don't have that kind of protective dimension of like don't. We just have don't create false idols, but the ones we have are not idols.
Yeah,
You know,
ours
that's
are.
the yes,
Yours are. Yours are idols. Ours are
yeah,
not.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so this exceptionalism is really
Oh,
well,
thank you for using that word.
yeah.
Exceptionalism.
Hmm. It is. It's to me. It is a dance of shadow and ego that, for me, it's why depth psychology offers something so valuable as a kind of critique. And I want to go into you're talking around the prophets and to really dive into that. You could have written anything, right? Like any book, you could have dove into this, and you chose the prophets. Why? Why that subject and why this time?
Well, when I started the center here in Albuquerque 38 years ago, we were written up in a number of national periodicals, and at least two of them said, and I didn't claim this, where they got it from, I'm not sure, but they claimed Richard is trying to establish a school for prophets, PHETS, prophets.
Yeah.
Uh, and I sort of was jarred by that and had to lean back and say, they're right. Paul, in two of his letters, Corinthians
Hmm.
and Ephesians, says that prophecy is the second most important gift after apostles for the building up of the church.
Hmm.
What happened to that,
Hmm.
if it's true? Because we don't like self criticism. Judaism didn't. And yet, Judaism, today I'm told, and I'm not trying to make a political point here, but 37% of Jewish people worldwide are in deep disagreement with what their own Israeli government is doing in Gaza today.
Hmm.
That's how long the prophets have lasted.
Hmm.
We've had a lot of Christian wars, and I don't know any Christian countries. 37% of Germany which was almost 100% Christian, did not oppose Hitler.
Mhm.
We've been on the side of our kings all along. The Jews learned not to trust power because very few people can handle power. And so it's, by definition, prophecy is an unordained power role. It doesn't have a title, it doesn't have a salary. Once you start paying a salary for for prophets, it's over.
Hmm.
You see, it can be bought off. They always appear at the edges of every group. Now they're mostly people like Martin Luther King and Emmylou Harris. It's just people who get it and don't need the title or the costume anymore.
So that's what really stood out to me in I was journaling one morning and reading your book and looking at my own psyche and some of the protective mechanisms that I've got in place, both that are outer facing and also the ones that are interfacing. And so I was writing about this guardian inside of me, and that's the image or the metaphor I was using, this guardian, watchman. And then I read where you quoted from Jeremiah, I think, and Ezekiel about how the prophets were called the sentries or the watchers.
Watchmen, they sure
Watchmen, yeah.
were. Yes.
And I just thought on a sociological level, it's imperative. So I was drawing this kind of parallel between the intrapsychic and the interpersonal, and how our social systems need somebody who's critiquing the organized systems that are becoming
collective.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they're becoming fixed and rigid, and so we need somebody doing that, and then also we need somebody inside of us doing that too. And that takes me back to your understanding of Christianity being about the ego and not about the demonic, that the religious practice is in fact a way of self-reflecting, so you don't let your kind of adaptations and concrete ways of being in the world take over. And so then you're in service to the complex more than something broader and larger.
Wow. You understand things well. Thank you.
Well, you say them in ways that I can amplify. I mean, that's, your books really have been so you were making this incredible argument about the prophets, but I'm still curious for you personally, why the prophets right now?
Well, I didn't answer that, did I?
Yeah, I'll hold you to it. It's all right.
Well, one of the other great things, I think it's the third chapter of the book already, they, without exception, critique the collective.
Mhm.
They don't go around trying to find bad apples, and neither do they concentrate on
Mhm.
sexual sin.
Mhm.
In fact, they hardly mention it, which is where your and my forms of Christianity have spent most of their time. What a waste of time. They wouldn't, if they were in, let me pick on your state. We New Mexicans love to pick on,
Yeah, I just caught that. Yeah,
love to pick on Texas.
we can take it. It's all right.
Yeah, you can. We wouldn't, the prophet wouldn't waste a great deal of time damning a guy who shot somebody.
Mm.
He would say, yeah, that happens, and he probably needs to be contained and convicted. But what really needs to be critiqued is the gun culture itself,
Mhm.
without exception. And I don't even have to just open the book of Amos. I counted 38 times he mentions Moab, Gaza, all these names that for the most part we don't have anymore. Jesus imitates him. You Bethsaida, you Chorazin, you Jerusalem. They critique the collective lie, the collective illusion. And in that, the individual stands revealed. I do a hard number in the book on John the Baptist. As shocking as this might be, I don't think he's a classic prophet at all. He wastes his time on the individual sexual sin of one king.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we would say today, well, of course. You know, don't be why are you is anybody surprised?
Right.
And it gives you a sense of moral superiority, moral righteousness. But the rest of the prophets concentrate on the group, the
Mm-hmm.
ethos, the culture. It was only with the last Pope, John Paul II, that we coined inside of Catholic theology the terms structural sin and institutionalized
Mm-hmm.
evil. When John Paul made the case very strongly, this is where evil hides. Evil has to first be called good by the culture. Everybody having 45 guns in their closet has to be thought of as highly moral and prudent before the individual can get away with walking around a gun and feel good with a gun and feel good about it.
Mm-hmm.
And you Jungians say this so well. I think that evil has to disguise itself as good.
Mm-hmm.
Has to. None of us would do evil
Mm-hmm.
unless someone has told us, oh, it's not evil. This is happening on a massive scale in the United States right now. We are calling direct lies truth, provable lies, lies that people know are lies, but we want them to be true. So, talk about magic theology. They're true because we want them to be. I don't know what's in
Mm-hmm.
store for us. I think philosophers would speak of nihilism. Nihil is the Latin word for nothingness. Once the father of lies, which is what Jesus called the demonic, once you call evil good, you're close to nihilism. And I can imagine all the demons. You know how I'm using the word demon.
Yeah.
Demons are spawned once you call evil good.
Do you psychologize that?
Are you asking me to?
Yeah. No. If
No.
what I'm saying is, do you when you talk about demons, for example, because people, I just kind of went off
Yeah.
thinking like that's a word that could bring up a lot for people.
Sure. There are 9 exorcism stories in the New Testament. So I'm not too quick to throw it out as medieval or
Mm-hmm.
ancient Judaism. I think there is a case to be made for evil becoming, well, they use the word possessive in a person.
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with them, people who cannot think outside of one little box and will defend it at all costs. Maybe we call them obsessive compulsive. Maybe we just call them cognitively rigid thinkers or moralistic
Yeah,
thinkers.
we pathologize it. But possessed. That's how
But
it's. Yeah.
they are possessed. They are. And so they're presented in the New Testament as people who are possessed of one worldview which is untouchable.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you get near me and change this because you pull this block out and the whole thing falls
Mm-hmm.
apart.
Mm-hmm.
I have to hate my father because my entire worldview depends on that.
Yeah.
Him being evil so I can be good. And after 54 years of men's work, that's not an uncommon pattern.
Yeah.
The demonizing of the father.
The blame game.
Yeah. And some
Mm-hmm.
eyes the mother too.
Mm-hmm. But really, you saw a lot more father wound in that space.
Yeah. We tend to be most hurt. It's in my limited experience by the same gender parent
Mm.
because we idealize, I'm going to be like him. I want to be like him. And then if he isn't accepting, embracing, we reject him all the greater.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I meet so many women, really, who have mother wounds, who feel their mother never affirmed their femininity, their embodiedness. Yeah.
Well, when you're thinking about this work that you've done on the prophets, what are some things you learned through writing the book about the prophets that you hadn't known before?
Which one should I center in on? I'm opening the table of contents.
Good. Locate. Use the map.
What did I say? The collective I learned from Amos. Oh yeah, the remnant. That is a word that is used in about 1/3 of the prophets. Only a remnant will be left.
Mm.
Only a remnant will get the point. It becomes in Jesus what some New Testament scholars call the mustard seed conspiracy.
Hmm.
That the truth is best held and best promoted not by majority rule, but by minority insight. The majority can't handle the truth very much,
Oh, fascinating.
isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's a biblical insight.
Wow.
It starts with the choice of the enslaved Jewish people themselves, a minority.
Mm-hmm.
David and Goliath, Bethlehem, the least of the cities of Judah. It's always the barren wife. It's always David, the rejected son. It's the theme of themes in
Yeah.
the Bible that don't look for majority rule to get the truth. And that's very likely an American illusion. If your party lost the last election, I hope it's good reason for hope. You see, if your party won the last election, you're still going to put your trust in political parties.
Mm. Mm.
If you lost, you said, as Jesus told us, our trust is not in any kingdom of this world, but in the kingdom of God. A different realm. I don't mean heaven. I mean where truth reigns in this world. And those will be little kingdoms on the edge. So the notion of the remnant, I think it's chapter 3, we would today call it a critical mass. It's a term we're more familiar. Jesus speaks of the remnant, of salt and leaven. Don't ever expect the majority to get the point. And don't be too disappointed when they don't. It will always be a small group that gets it and carries it forward. Martin Luther King understood that very well. Well, he was a biblical scholar. But we Catholics, because we had majority rule in Europe for centuries, we became a very corrupt Christendom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Protestantism rightly named and saw in us. But then poor John Calvin reproduces the same thing in Geneva. You know, it's all over again. Another form of empire, another form of.
Mm. Mm.
We didn't critique the Spanish Empire, the Roman Empire. I'm going backwards. We didn't critique empire because we were held captive by its rewards. Yeah, sad. I tell Catholics, and they hate me for it, not all of them, but there is a reason we're called the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Now, you Protestants always notice that.
Yeah.
We didn't notice that.
One might think we need to work together.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, the good Protestants didn't have much critical to say about the British Empire.
Right.
And it continues. And the Orthodox didn't have much critical to say about the Byzantine Empire. They dressed up just like them.
Well, it's a really odd phenomena, isn't it? That pattern. Jung wrote about this in Owning Your Own Shadow. It just says that the water of life tends to be manifest in the world, and then we sell admission to it, and commodify it,
Sell admission, yeah.
and then it moves along, and our infrastructure still exists, but it goes along, and it's pissed off, and so goes our history. It's just odd that you're this. I'm really enjoying this critique of the majority rule, and that in part is the process. We just will create this. So how do we deal with that if this is inevitable?
We don't get too defeated by failure. That's what made a lot of the Jews so wise. They failed since the beginning, really. And Jesus on the cross for Christians was supposed to become an icon of failure, transmuted into success. It's not a love of losing, it's just a learning from losing and a refusal to idealize winning. Winning doesn't mean you won in the mind and the heart of God. It feels good for a while, and God must understand we need a few victories. You want to give them to a child like you understand as a father. You want to give your kids a few victories so they can feel power. But don't base your life on the piling up of victories, or you become addicted to it. I'm afraid much of our government is a lot of boys, and they're usually boys, who won too often. They don't know how failure feels or how you learn from it. You're so easy to talk to because you get it and you make 6 connections right away. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You make it easy, Richard. So, yes, speaking of which, you've spent decades guiding people through faith and doubt and grace and transformation, to use your word. Were there moments when you felt lost, totally lost on your journey?
Mostly in my 40s and 50s,
Yeah.
I had to go through huge self-doubt. I saw my name on books and got used to standing ovations in arenas and halls. And I'd go back to my hotel room and took off my clothes like everybody else and knew all of it was a lie. I'm not intelligent or famous. I'm just a human being who was admittedly given a certain gift. But the deep knowledge that it was a gift and not an achievement. It was a gift and not an accomplishment. I had to struggle through to that by a lot of experienced self-doubt, even self-loathing, where I have these lovely little Catholic ladies come up, kissing my hand, hugging me, and I would want to say to them, if you only knew how ordinary I am, if you only knew that it's just a little bit true.
Well,
Yeah,
sorry, what else comes up there?
that's all.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay. You saying that self-doubt, self-loathing, that's kind of what I mean by the inner prophet.
Yes.
You
Very
had a
good.
you had a
Very good.
system in place to prevent you from becoming too inflated. And like, we want to get rid of a sense of unworthiness. Like, people, as a psychotherapist, people
Yeah, it's
always,
like it's the worst
yeah,
possible thing.
yeah. But I mean, I'm deeply, it's painful, and certainly painful because we've not been initiated to understand that's part of us. But the discomfort, I think, is related to the amount of denial that we have.
Right
And
on. Right on.
but so that's how I really when I was framing your book and kind of paying attention to the prophets, really looking at the kind of socio-political structures, but how those are, of course, mapped onto my inner life, and having shame and self-doubt and inferiority and an imposter syndrome, that how that is.
Yes, an imposter syndrome. I had that many a time. Oftentimes, while I'm on the stage and the words are flowing out of my mouth, a little voice is saying, "But you're a big phony, Richard. You don't live it yourself."
How'd you go through that?
Well, initially by a martini afterwards.
Yeah, I know a
Yeah.
lot of people that try that one too. Yeah.
And then found that didn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I was very influenced, I think you know me enough to know, by a French saint you wouldn't think would influence a 21st century American. We call her the Little Flower, Saint Therese of Lisieux.
Mhm.
And of all her wonderful lines, she said, "Whoever is willing to serenely bear the trial of being displeasing to herself." And that was quoted by Scott Peck at the beginning of his lesser known book, People of the Lie.
Oh, yeah.
He says, "People will not be displeasing to themselves.
Yeah.
I will be pleasing to myself." I woke up upset with myself in a dream earlier this week and just attempted to hate myself. And I remembered that wonderful line, "Whoever is willing to serenely bear the trial of being displeasing to himself, that person is a hiding place for Jesus." Now, there's a French nun talking, but you see the brilliance of it.
Yeah.
And that's what Scott Peck said at the beginning of People of the Lie. He said it's the most profound, or one of the most profound psychological statements he ever heard. Because he said, "That's what I see most people, and I would say religious people in particular, will not be displeasing to themselves."
Hmm.
They allowed Christianity to become what I call a cult of innocence.
Hmm.
I'm saved, I'm right, I'm superior, I'm moral. That isn't even hard to prove. And what does Jesus do? He eats with sinners, and is hated for it, lets himself be known as a sinner,
Mm.
hangs out with sinners. That's not a cult of innocence. What our job is to do is to be in solidarity with the excluded, not above them,
Mm.
judging them even worse. So Trez helped me a lot at many moments in my life. I was able to visit her death room about 5 years ago in France and had a deep, profound, almost apparition of her. I don't want to say I saw something visually, but it was sure close to it. And it was like she was telling me, "You can trust me, and I can trust you." And we do. I trust her message. She called it her new way, her little way. And here it is in my language and the language of the prophets. Surprise of surprises. You come to God not by doing it right, as almost everybody thinks. You come to God by doing it wrong. And I could make a strong biblical case for that. You can't find a canonizable saint in the Bible, except maybe for Mary herself or Joseph, but all the rest are wounded healers, very
Mm.
wounded,
Hmm.
who we wouldn't call a saint, because they all made big mistakes. They all came to enlightenment by first doing it wrong, sometimes a lot wrong, before they learned to do it right. David himself, the whole man of the Old Testament, did a lot of things wrong before he finally woke up and God still used him. And I guess that was self-knowledge for me. I can't deny God has used me, but I know it's not because I did anything right, uh, except listen.
Mm,
Yeah,
that's not nothing.
well, it's not nothing.
Mm.
You're such a good listener yourself. And so I babble on because I've got a good ear. Stop me.
I know. I want to shut up and make sure you follow the thread and you keep going. I want to make sure that I'm not interrupting.
No, you're not at all.
Well, but it brings up a really interesting piece because we're kind of walking this line between the prophet as the sociology of the prophet and the, I would say, depth psychology of the prophet. But you're looking at it as through the book, you're really looking at the ways that we navigate the complexity of power. Fair to
Definitely,
say? Yeah.
definitely. Very
Yeah.
good. Thank you.
So what do you see today, modern time, when you look out, where are our prophets and what are they speaking against?
They're they're formed by the church very often, really they are. But they're more formed by the absurdity and tragedy of injustice,
Mm-mm.
by people who see children massacred on the streets of Gaza, Ukraine overtaken by a Russian empire, who hold that sadness deeply until it changes them. Sadness is a great transformative force. If you don't let it become maudlin and self serving, but just
Mhm.
enriching, it creates solidarity with suffering, solidarity with so called sinners. The sinners and 12-step program helps us to see this. Sinners are not necessarily badder. I know that's not a good word. We are, but they have a disease. They use the medical therapeutic language to liberate the alcoholic or the addict. And that's helped an awful lot of people when they didn't have to morally hate themselves, but could medically weep over themselves. I met him in the jail where I was chaplain for 14 years. And I met such humility there. Oh my gosh. People who thought they were nothing. They were hated by their dad. They were hated by the policeman. They were hated by the guards. And now they hated themselves.
Hmm.
So sad. But they were the ones most prepared to believe that God did not hate them. Prepared. It took some few times, but eventually to get it in. You're a beloved son. And just that word son would enlighten them because they'd never been a son anywhere. You know,
Belonging.
belonging.
Yeah.
Very good.
So you said something that just really kind of caught me, which was this compassion that you have for the medicalizing of that word. I hear the word a lot, and of course I want to hyphenate dis-ease, but then I've
Yeah,
been quite involved with the AA community and find it to be one of the more valuable spiritual practices and
absolutely.
dogmas that we've gotten. And I use the word dogma, I think in this case, really in a healthy way, in a more Buddhist way, that it's a pathway or a process. And back to the, part of the reason why is, of course, we don't have a culture that's doing initiation rites of passage to help kind of map the territory for us or give us an experience that we need to become a more kind of broader version of ourselves. We don't have a process to go through. So of course we fill that longing with all kinds of, objects and thrills and pleasures and creature comforts and, tradition, us them mentalities. And so we're not connecting to to a more just to a more I think compassionate understanding of the world. And I tend to have a little shadow here, which you've helped me unpack a little bit, where I look at medicalizing something as all bad and I want to pull it away, but you just did it so compassionately where you
Well,
said,
no, no.
yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you for that.
We did the same. I got prepared for it. In the early 60s, the Catholic Church still would not bury victims of suicide.
Whoa, yeah.
Oh, the horror stories
Yeah.
worldwide. And Rome came out strongly. Suicide does not deserve judgment, it deserves forgiveness and sympathy and compassion. So we got to practice that, those who were willing to listen, for 20 some years before we learned it with addicts.
Mm,
Suicides and addicts.
mhm.
What are you helping by hating them or judging them?
And so on that note, you've said that social sin destroys a civilization. And what
Secretly, it doesn't look like sin, it looks like success. It looks like we found a way to win, to all have guns, to all be paranoid, to go down the list of capital sins. We've got to find a way to call evil good. Let me find that
Mhm.
those verses. Oh, here it is. Page. Isn't this narcissistic of me quoting my own book? Killing
It's
is wrong.
I know I was gonna in defense of you, I was gonna argue with you, but that's okay. Keep going.
Killing is wrong, war is good. Greed is wrong, but luxury and unfettered capitalism are ideals to be sought after.
Mm,
Pride is bad, but nationalism and patriotism are admirable. Never in the Bible, however.
mhm, mm,
Lust is wrong, but flirting and seduction are very attractive. Envy is a capital sin, but advertising is a way of life. It's called Madison Avenue. I don't hate you because you work on Madison Avenue, but be careful. Anger, anger at anger at our neighbor is wrong, but angry people get their way.
mhm.
When someone speaks loud or strong, he must be right.
Yeah.
Sloth is a sin, but
Mhm,
wealthy people can take it easy.
mhm,
We won't talk about the billionaire who's in the White House right now. Huh? Murder is wrong, but easy access to guns is a right and a duty.
mm,
You know, I just listed 10 there.
that's good.
Socially, where we judge it to be a sin, a virtue.
Mm,
Individually, it's a sin. Condemn the individual. Therefore, this has created a very ambiguous morality,
yeah.
very two-faced morality that we're unconscious of in Christianity. We say it's bad, but out of the other side of our mouth, we don't really mean it. It's not bad.
Well, that brings up something important about you said it as I was thinking it, condemn the individual. That sure is a great scapegoat, isn't it?
It's so easy
Yeah.
because the individual is so defenseless and so ready to believe that it's unworthy,
Oof. Yeah.
where everybody will run to the defense of the society. No, we're not that way. Don't you make fun of Texas or New Mexico or any other society. Why do we feel this tremendous need to defend the collective? I think because we all hide there. We hide in the collective, and pride in the collective, starting in high school football teams, probably, is a virtue to be admired.
Yeah, we hide in the collective. That's really good. And it's like we tie our identity to collective values, so it's a personal
Very
offense.
good.
Yeah.
Yes. You always get it. It's so easy to talk to you.
Well, you're
Thank
Thank you. That means a lot, Richard. So when you talk about the prophet and the way that you think everybody's capable of vision, prophetic vision?
We can represent criticism as a something to be admired.
Mm,
If we can train, as apparently the schools for prophets did, that the only standard for judgment was the love of God, nothing less, not other nations, not other people. There has to be a rediscovery of positive criticism.
mm,
There is a way to be a critic without being carping, negative, superior, righteous. And that's what we don't like in so many Christians.
mm,
Did you ever read any of the short stories of Flannery O'Connor?
mm-mm.
Not that well known, probably. She lived in Georgia, and almost half of her short stories are her deep exposure of what she thought of as hypocritical Southern Christianity. She has one character, Mrs. Turpin. Just the name begins to give it away. And Mrs. Turpin has a twisted face in the presence of all evil and not good people who aren't white and go to her church.
Mhm.
And then am I mixing up two short stories? At the end of one of them, I think that's called Revelation. She has
It's
the black
impressive.
people dancing their way wildly into heaven. It's just an assault on Southern Christianity. No, I'm not trying to pick on the South. That's the version of Christianity that America has widely accepted.
Yeah.
Slaveholder religion was so blind to its own shadow that it could legitimate the ownership of human beings
Yeah.
who were created in the image and likeness of God. How wrong can you get? How wrong can you get? But they didn't see it. They couldn't see it. Why? Because the collective,
Mhm.
just like apartheid in South Africa,
Mm.
couldn't see its collective lie. It might even be harder to see than your personal sin.
That makes a lot of sense. These invisible currents,
Yeah,
social currents.
yeah,
Yeah, it's such an unseen dimension of our systems, and most people don't think to comedy does. Comedy looks back on it and
yes.
critiques it,
Comedy is one of the most successful.
Yeah.
I'll try to find one of the paragraphs describing Mrs. Turpin
Turpin.
next time I'm with
Well,
her twisted face in the presence of bad people, which she was not.
of course not. What are you talking, me? No. So I wanna be lovingly conscientious of time with you, Richard, and I've got just a couple more questions to dive
Okay,
into.
go ahead. Go ahead.
So you're almost 82.
Almost.
What's your relationship like to the mystery of reality?
I wrote that book on the two halves of life, building on
Mhm,
Jung,
mhm.
called Falling Upward. But here I am, about to turn 82, and people are saying, "Well, where are you?" I said, "I think I'm in the third half of life." And the first guy I told that to said, "Richard, that's not good mathematics. You can't have three halves." Uh, I said, "But I fear sometimes I'm antinomian. I just don't look to laws at all. They've been internalized and largely obeyed in terms of society, but not admired.
Hmm.
I'm most disappointed in the Catholic Church. and yet I love it profoundly
Mhm.
because I was raised with good Catholic theology. I'm most disappointed in the United States of America, having preached in 45 countries, that I don't any longer need to think we're better than the other 44. It feels almost antinomian. Like, Richard, are there any? I don't worry when I don't go to Mass on Sunday. You better erase that for any Catholics who are listening. I mean, I still love a beautiful Eucharist, but they're the rarity where the priest isn't center stage
Mm.
and the mystery is center stage. So I'm in the third half of life, is my long attempt to answer that good question,
That's a good answer.
where the things that used to matter, hardly any of them do.
Mm.
Hardly any of them do. The people I thought were the winners have shown themselves to be the losers far too often. And the people whom we call the losers have been the dearest souls I've met in my 82 years. So I've stopped judging. Judgment isn't very strong in my list of virtues, which is scary. It feels, well, Richard, do you have any criteria? Maybe I don't. I, uh, I know some of my worst mistakes taught me the most. Why could I hate my mistakes anymore?
Hmm.
You know. So I'm in no man's land, but very happily so. I was on the porch. I have a front porch with a little chair. Oh, for at least an hour and 15 minutes yesterday, and had a need to do nothing else. People come up and talk to me on the porch, because I guess I look like I'm available. That's what I hope is true. I don't have any costume on,
Mhm.
and I love my Franciscan habit. Everybody loves the brown robe, but it's a hiding place too.
Mhm.
Yeah. And titles. They insist on calling me father here, which is such a beautiful word. And I stopped correcting people because one man told me, Richard, you don't need it, but I need it. I need to call you father. Oh, okay. If you need it, then I'll get out of the way. Call me whatever you want, but I don't need it anymore. The title.
Mm.
I'm just blabbering now, John.
No, I think the role is. I had that insight after knowing you. I've the role relative to how many lost people are out there in need of a fathering that's connected to a
Oh,
transpersonal mystery.
so many.
And so that I do see the wisdom. I mean, at a younger age, I would have criticized it more freely, but now
Sure.
I think I really understand the necessity of a system that says, no, we actually need kind of transpersonal mothers and transpersonal fathers. We cut out the mothers in a lot of ways, unfortunately. So that's a certain deficiency in our culture. But to have the transpersonal mothers and fathers is certainly necessary.
That's what Mary became for
Mm.
Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
Transpersonal mother. Notre Dame.
Mm.
Our mother.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Our Lady, I should say. I love to teach. Catholicism is archetypal religion.
Mm-hmm.
Protestantism is biblical religion. And in that, it puts us to shame. Now, if you can put the two together, the best of biblical with the best of archetypal and healthy psychological, you have a good avenue to transformation. And you don't have to use those words. In fact, I would encourage you not to. I wouldn't want you as a therapist
Mm-hmm.
to say Catholicism is archetypal. That's not your role to bother with that.
Well, I think probably on some level, good religion should be.
Very good. On some level, good religion should be.
Yeah. That's part of what I understand is that maybe I'm too pluralistic, but or perennialist. I mess those two up all the time. But I do see the kind of necessity of these organized traditions to contain the unseen aspects and
Absolutely.
these currents that are universal. And if we don't have a way to relate to those, we won't have a self-reflection.
They're containers.
Yeah.
Psyche needs containers.
Mm-hmm.
And don't hold yourself above them.
That's the kicker right there, is the idolatry.
Yes.
Well, I want to be mindful and be sure we close out well. Is just in closing, I'm curious if there are any kind of little threads that you've got
Do you
hanging
want
out.
me to read the final?
I would love you to. Yeah.
Page 159. An angel was walking down the streets of the world, carrying a torch in one hand and a pail of water in the other. A woman asked the angel, "What are you doing with that torch and pail?" The angel said, "With the torch, I am burning down the mansions of heaven. With the pail, I am putting out the fires of hell. This is the only way we will ever know who really loves God."
Hmm.
Much of the subtext of the book is an attempt to undo the egocentric reward punishment system. So I had to end with that story. I'd forgotten that I used to use it a lot as a young priest. And a man from DC came out to visit me. He said, "Do you still tell that story?" I said, "What story?" And someone's on my porch. I
You're available.
and he said, I said, "My God, I forgot that story." And it was just about when I was going to write the final chapter of this book. And there it is in one succinct statement. The reward punishment system destroys Christianity. Most of us take it as a given that God's rewarding good people and hating, not just slightly hating, for all eternity.
Yeah.
We have a hater in chief as the center of the universe. This cannot be true.
Wow.
Cannot be true. And maybe this is a good final word. What's helping a lot of us on this is cosmology,
Mm-hmm.
is the Hubble telescope.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the new one called? The Webb telescope. We keep uncovering more galaxies and galaxies inside of galaxies, and black holes inside of every single galaxy we discover.
Mhm.
We're supposed to believe God is so petty as to punish people who don't like him. I mean, it doesn't work. Thank God it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But nature, science might end up being our best friends as we learn to contemplate them, reverence them, respect them, listen to them, love them.
It's a good place to stop. Thank you.
You're so easy to talk to.
So are you.
Thank you, John Boy.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Lots of love.
We'll see you again.
See you soon.
Controls your dreams, persuade